good evening. Yesterday we ended the evening with the head of the opposition, and we thought that we would have the prime minister today, but he preferred to go to Putin and to bring gifts to the state of Israel. Okay, so what we decided is to reframe this. We began the conference with the head of the operations directorate, with the intelligence directorate, and now we're going to speak to the operations directorate. If you know, there's one, the intel directorate, the operation directorates. They're two of the most important generals in the general staff, of course, after the IDF chief of general staff. We are with Mr. Aaron Khalifa. He began in the paratroopers. Later on, he basically did every single position. He was a commander of Base 1, which is the officers' commander's course. He was a paratrooper commander. He was part of the fire division. He was then appointed, then he was given, of course, he, of course, was then now appointed. One of his jobs was then directorate of the operations directorate. Okay, many, many jobs, many positions, and we're going to hear one of the greatest generals we have in the general staff. So the floor is yours, sir. I would like you to begin with something that's not strategic or tactical, but I do believe it's strategic on one level. You, I believe, did 5 jobs of a brigade commander, as a colonel, and every one of them was very serious. But if you now compare yourself, your generation of generals, brigadier generals that are now, of course, brigade commanders, divisional commanders, I mean, all of the people from lieutenant colonel and up, how much does that impact what they do? Well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind remarks. But I have to resolve one of the compliments and say that this younger generation is so much better in the way that than I was when I was a brigade commander. Thankfully, for the state of Israel, the youth of today, the squadron commanders, the company commanders, the brigade commanders, so much better than we were at the time. They're more curious, they know more, they're knowledgeable, they understand the strategic situation of Israel, they understand use of force, and thank God that we have these commanders. Okay, after 48 hours hearing only problems, then you've given us a boost of optimism. Okay. So still in this very competitive market, in an economy doing that's well, in high tech that's providing really huge salaries, and issues that are constantly tugging at us and creating dreams for the young generation, how do you in the IDF hold on to this quality stuff? Well, I think the IDF chief of staff said it clearly. The people are above all else. There's the best capital. But the good thing about being head of the operations directorate is that I visit everyone and I see things on the ground. That's the best way to know how to deploy forces in the way that's the most efficient. And when I visit the A200 or IT or Air Force or our ground forces, wherever it is, whatever bases I go to, people who know that they are on a mission. And when somebody gets up in the morning knowing the significance of their actions, then I think they know how to put the big money aside, because they know that what they're doing holds enormous meaning, and people need meaning in their lives. And I think military service, that is a calling, and that provides the people in service exactly that element. Along with that, it is true that we have to provide the best conditions to our staff, and I think the IDF is investing quite a lot in that. And also in the next multi-year plan, we have to deal with our human capital. There's nothing more important than human capital to the IDF, to our security forces, and to the country in its entirety. People know that people then go on to a second career, a third career after the military. Longevity, lifespan is getting longer, and I think that a military career not only provides advantages to people, but that is the strength of our country. So 50% of people are women. And as we know, women are just as good as men in all measures. So Isn't the IDF missing out on an enormous opportunity not opening all doors to women? The vast majority of IDF positions are open to women, and the IDF is always considering opening the rest to women. I have a lot of discussions. Operational, very complex operational briefings, and 80% or more of the people in front of me are women. From captain, major, lieutenant, colonels, and up. They're women. So I don't feel that we're missing out. I do believe we have to continue to consider other options for women, just as we saw in the Armored Corps, and just as we saw in the Navy, and in other units of the ground forces. And in the Armored Corps, in tanks, I don't know where they're gonna what's gonna happen with that, but I think that we have to examine things professionally in order to allow everybody, men or women, to serve significant military service without bias of gender. Okay. Let's go to a concept that was invented in the General Staff in recent years, which is called in Hebrew Mabam, which is the campaign between campaigns, or the war between war. This sort of really is a way to encapsulate the way that the IDF has managed campaigns, or the campaigns between campaigns. There was a very concentrated campaign between campaigns in Syria. The IDF has managed to stop the entrenchments of the Iranis in Syria, the creation of a second Hezbollah in Syria, the precision missiles that came from Syria. But the feeling in the last year is that the rate of actions of the IDF in Syria is going down. Syria is covering itself with Russian-made aerial defense systems, and the populace there that helped this attacks on Israel are continuing to feel that sentiment, and that the Syrians, who know a thing or two about and the Iranians know a thing or two about strategy and tactics. They invented chess, didn't they? So things are becoming more complex. Iraq, Lebanon. So how is the IDF dealing with the Iranian entrenchment in the area? First of all, the Persians did invent chess. I know quite a few Jews that know exactly how to say mat, as in mate, which is a Persian, an old Parsi word. But this shows us that the Israeli policy of vagueness in regards to campaigns between campaigns is apparently better than I thought, because your question demonstrates that. So the IDF will continue, and has in the last year, with every piece of its force and every element, so a lot of them not obvious to most people, to stop the entrenchment of Iranis in the area. I think that we saw this very clearly in the all-over system of the Iranians as seen around us, that same sort of stranglehold the Iranis always tried. One of the fronts was around us, 6 fronts against us. We look at the Iranis all day and all night, so we've got our eye on them anyway. But the campaign between campaigns is far from over. A people that wants to live, that wants to avoid war, also has to know how to be very smart in its use of force, and that's what we're doing. So Iranian entrenchment in Syria, Lebanon, precision missiles, Iranian support of terrorist activities, terrorist organizations in Gaza, all of that continues. The Iranis haven't stopped dreaming about exterminating the Jewish people and all of Israel, and that's what we work against. So I am convinced in the power of the IDF to do what needs to be done, along with the fact that you have additional elements, conditions that were known to everybody. The Russian player, which is enormously significant. The American player, which is I just thought about that. This is January, and we have 2 events in this January that are like milestone events, and this is all within a month. The first month of this decade. Yeah, if this month is predictive of the next decade, we are going to have a very turbulent decade. I mean, the assassination of Soleimani by the United States in the beginning of January, and now, of course, the declaration on the deal of the century, 2 events with enormous potential for as to be significant strategic milestones. And the IDF is preparing. Okay, you talked about precision missiles. We saw 2 demonstrations of the Iranis. One on the 14th of September, in Saudi Arabia, where their missiles targeted immediately, exactly between the eyes, so to speak, of the tankers and the distillation and refinery towers. After, of course, they tried to hide it later, but even these precision attacks against al-Assad in Iraq were precision attacks. The fact that the Americans evacuated the people, that's great, of course. They probably pre-alerted to this event. We don't know how they got that intel, but the Americans managed to get their people out, thank God. How can the state of Israel, or how does the state of Israel prepare for that precision missile threat that was determined here in the conference as maybe a strategic threat of the first order because of its option of harming our defense and attack capabilities, our intel, our recruitment bases, general staff, and our power station. So how do you address this on a tactical and strategic level?
Strategically, as you've mentioned, we talked about the power of the threat, the strength of the threat, and merely defining, if we define this as a strategic threat, then we will provide a complete strategic solution. Of course, we cannot detail all of its components here because of the classification. But I'm telling this to you and to everyone here that we are devoting many, many hours to this, and we invest a lot, and our investments will grow even in the next upcoming multi-annual plan in order to provide safety and security to Israel and to enable function and operational continuity for the IDF, even if it will be targeted and harmed. It's happening through things that perhaps we best keep silent on if we're talking about the prevention of the armament that you just mentioned in the context of the campaign between the wars. And it's also important to say that we should be proud of the fact that the state of Israel and the IDF has the answer of active defense, such as Magic Wand and the Chetz, the arrow system, and Iron Dome, and the Air Force, which I don't need to tell you about its quality and nature. And I am completely convinced that it's a pretty big challenge, but we can rise to this challenge. And I'm pretty sure that these threats that you mentioned indeed exist, but the response provided by Israel to them are better than what we saw in those places that you mentioned. Okay, you were a bit vague, but on the other hand, you projected a lot of confidence. Look, you don't need to be vague. I'm not trying to, blur anything. We are aware of this threat. We monitor it in our intel. We are preparing for it both defensively and on the assaultive plane. And I highly recommend to our enemies, and I'm not being cocky here, but because of my familiarity and acquaintance with the IDF's force, not to test us so in the context of precision and missiles. Now, let's move on from Lebanon, because the ones who are building these precision missiles there are the Iranians. And now let's move on to Iran itself. And what really concerns us there is their nuclear project, because Trump withdrew from the agreement. The Iranians are also beginning to make some slow progress forward. And you can see on this slide 4 scenarios. 2 that are very optimistic, but the realization chances are pretty low. 1, that the regime will collapse because of the sanctions. Another option is for the Americans to attack the nuclear program. We in the INSS think that the chances of both things happening are not that big. And now we reach 2 more complicated scenarios. 1 is a negotiation, and that's more of a political, diplomatic issue, not so much a military one. But there's another option that they progress towards nuclear capabilities. Initially, they violate it every 60 days, and then they can withdraw from the agreement and from the NPT. Is the IDF willing as a last resort, but is it prepared? Does it have any plan to tackle the Iranian nuclear project? With your permission and with the permission of the audience here, I'd like to ask you a question. If we were to sit here a month ago, and let's say if we wanted to talk about the Quds Force and Soleimani, and you would have prepared a slide, would you have put an arrow upwards or downwards regarding the targeting and assassination of Soleimani by the Americans? Look, you can applaud him, because I'll show you exactly the slide that we prepared in the INSS in May of 2019. After Trump withdrew not just from the NPOJ, but also canceled the waivers on oil export, and it was clear that they'll start working the Iranians. And we prepared this slide on the nuclear issue, on terrorism, and also with respect to the damage that will be caused to exporting of oil, we said. And well, your question is actually a good one. We said that the Americans are willing to exert maximal pressure on the Iranians, but only in two areas: economic, sanctions, diplomatic, isolation, and they don't want to use military force. It was very obvious when they shot down their UAV above international waters, and undoubtedly that we, just like the Intel Directorate, we should have asked ourselves and you whether this concept that the Americans are leaving and the Iranians have the upper hand, is that still applicable, this mindset. I suggest that we do not change or reverse this view. We need to see that Soleimani's activity is it ongoing, the American willingness to use force? What do you think? So just so that we're in the same club, if you were to ask me a week before he was assassinated if there's any chance that the Americans would do it, I'd say the answer is no. And in this context, it's a good thing that this is what happened, because a very significant problem was created in this issue on the American system. But I cannot avoid the question about the nuclear issue. Ultimately, the State of Israel determined very clearly that as part of its highest national interest, we must prevent Iranian nuclear capabilities. The role of the IDF is to guarantee the safety and security of the State of Israel and to realize its security needs. If we need to do it, we'll be able to do it. You said a few good words about the Air Force. Yes, it was hard for me to do. I guess you also said a few good words about the intel when we talked about the precision missiles, the ground forces. That's where you come from. We saw, it wasn't a report, but Major General Brick had some very harsh things to say, and the state controller in the Israeli society, there's this feeling that the military, the ground forces, are less prepared, especially for a certain maneuver that would entail losses. The Israeli society is highly sensitive to human lives. What can you tell us about the preparedness of the ground forces and its ability to carry out some kind of a dominant ground maneuver? I have signed off on all the IDF's operational plans in all the theaters, and in all these programs there is a true maneuvering activity of the ground forces. Once again, I don't want to sound cocky, God forbid. We'll have to pay a price for that, sometimes a heavy price, and you know, war is never something pleasant, and both sides have to pay a price. But I'm saying this very clearly: the ground forces are ready right now to carry out their assignments. Are there any gaps in the ground forces? Just like in the Air Force, let's say if Major General Norkin would have been sitting here, and if you were to ask him, he would have told you about the age of the helicopters, how many fighter jets he would like to have, and how many munitions in his warehouses. And if you would come to my home, you know, maybe we need to change a doorknob and fix some things. That's the same in all over the IDF, and this is why we have these multi-annual plans. The previous multi-annual plan that was called Gideon, under the command of Lieutenant General in Reserves Gadi Eisenkot. He's a new scholar in the INSS. Well, you got there a very good man. Significantly improved the situation in the ground forces. Are there still gaps? Yes. The new multi-annual plan that's called TNUFA, is it supposed to bring significant enhancement to the ground forces by bringing victory at a lower cost and much more quickly? The answer is that. Just for us not to be left with questions about the situation in 4 or 5 years from today, let me tell you, the ground forces will know how to maneuver to wherever they need to maneuver to reach decisive victory over the enemy and to bring the desired result for the State of Israel's security. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that we need to bring other things. The TNUFA multi-annual plan is not just a matter of resources. It brings a different concept, different combat methods, different innovative training methods, lethal capabilities to the ground forces and to the IDF in general. It's supposed to bring that security that we need so badly here for this country to continue and further develop. That is the role control of the military, and it will know how to do it in the best possible way. And to go back to the first question, by the way, first of all, thanks to the quality of its people, and also because I think that we know where to invest and what to do in order to advance it, to take on current and future challenges. And you've already mentioned the drones and the UAVs and the precision missiles, and all of these form the future challenges. We are preparing for future wars, and hopefully they'll never happen. You've mentioned the word multi-annual plan. TNUFA, that's the multi-annual plan led by Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi. Is there something to back this? I mean, did the State of Israel give you a sufficient budget for this annual plan, multi-annual plan? And are you perhaps delaying and not using the check that you were given in foreign exchange by the U.S. with the FMF? Look, like I said earlier, multi-annual plan, it's not just about the money. There are a lot of things that are related to the IDF structure and organization and the combat methods and the training and exercises, things that are not necessarily related to the check. We are deep into this multi-annual plan. There are certain decisions that were already reached last year in 2019. For example, the amount of munitions and the way in which the Chief of General Staff perceives the lethality needed for the ground forces and for the air forces. I think that what is special in this multi-annual plan is that on its way to formulate the multi-annual plan and the funds, and I'll soon talk about the American dollars, the MOU, in order to do that, we were required to be engaged in a very long process. And you know, in the IDF, when the door closes, the processes indeed are very, very thorough, but this was more than thorough than anything I'd experienced. And there were dozens of teams from within the military and also from outside the military. And we tried to think about how the next campaign would look like, taking into account all the challenges that we might face. And first of all, we thought about the concept of operation, and only then we thought about force buildup. So it's indeed already been prepared. This plan, it will be presented to the military and to the general public, the parts that we can present to the public over the next few weeks, and it will talk about the directions of lethal capability that combines all the technologies, modernization that will help us reach a decisive victory over the enemy. And the Chief of General Staff already talked about how he thinks, what he thinks about procurement in dollars for the next decade. And there as well, we will see the required changes in order to achieve a better military for the assignments that are very challenging. And we're not just talking about the war assignments in the first circle, the campaign between the wars as well. And also in our daily lives, I'm sitting here, but there are soldiers regarding Gaza from the air, from the sea, from the ground in Judea and Samaria that we just sent additional units there because of recent occurrences in order to provide a security and sense of safety for the people living there and in the Golan Heights as well. So the dollar program has been settled. It's a good and balanced program, and it will achieve exactly what the Chief of Staff, General Staff intended for it to do, and hopefully we won't have to test it. The substitute for the Yasul that finds itself making emergency landings, have you agreed on that? I think that the Air Force will come out much stronger than what it currently is. Its platforms, the different drones and the fighter jets and the munitions that we need for the targets that we're facing on the other side. And there's a reason why I said this. We see that if we need to use this force, the use of force will be lethal, quick, precise, and will make it very clear very quickly to the other side what the power relations are and how these kind of campaigns will be finalized. But I assume that you'll be invited to see some of these instruments that you've mentioned further down the line. Thank you. I have a question about the present and one about the distant future. The Trump deal has been announced. Our neighbors are not pleased with it. Is the IDF prepared for two lines of response? One, if it's just the deal, and number two, if a certain annexation process will come along with this deal of the century. The IDF is the military of a democratic country, and the expression of that is that, and I'm saying this at least for my view as head of operations, any decision of the civilian, the government echelon, whatever it decides, the IDF will know how to provide security to Israelis, no doubt about that. Any decision they reach, the IDF will know how to provide the necessary security for the people of Israel. Specifically, like you said, we are preparing for any development. The first preparation is intel. We need intel in order to understand the development in Judea and Samaria, in Gaza, amongst our neighbors, in the different circles, because each decision has a different circles of options and developments. So we are prepared in the short range. But without the Trump outline as well, I mean, the IDF already has plans for any kind of a violent outburst in all the theaters, and we can look not just at one theater, let's say the northern theater or the southern theater. I also know now at any given moment to provide an operational response in order to provide greater security. We are going to provide the operational meanings, and whatever is decided we will execute. Currently, there are several battalions enhancing security in the Judea and Samaria region. We've also increased our forces in the area of the Gaza Strip, and will continue to do so, based upon the needs and developments. The IDF has, I believe, the best intel directorate on earth, and it knows how to provide the necessary intel to decision makers, and we will know how to use our forces. This is how we operate, and I can tell you that so far, at least, it works. January 2020. Let's say you're leaving for 10 years and then you return. What's the IDF that you say? People say that AI, artificial intelligence, will be dominant. We won't be needing soldiers. We won't be needing pilots, any soldiers from the armored corps. Do you think that the battlefield will change, or how will it change in view of the new technologies which maybe promise a lot but don't always deliver on that promise? Well, once again, this question, it's kind of convenient because, I was told that in the past people would ask the question, when will we not need an army? But, we know that for the decades to come, the state of Israel will need to have a very strong military in order to deter its enemies from harming us. It's very important to understand that the stronger the military force, following the panel that you held yesterday, and despite the attempts of Itai Brun to create war here, all the participants on the stage try to explain that they do not want more war, and I think that they don't want war because they understand the outcomes of such a war, and the fact that it would be completely useless to start a war against Israel. So if we meet here in 10 years and we will have been engaged in the right processes, 10 years from today our enemies will continue to understand that the gap between us and them does not get minimized or is not even maintained, but thanks to technology, thanks to the power, and thanks to the strength of national security that we don't have time to get into them, the economy, society, and values, and a lot of things that are extremely important for national security, because we're not only talking about military force here. This gap will continue to grow, and the bigger it grows, our enemies will opt to resort to power less and less, and perhaps we will have peace and quiet for a long time. If over this decade, and it might happen, there will be clashes, and I'm not going to grade campaigns, Operation Protective Edge or the Second Lebanon War, but in any such clash, the final outcome should be that the enemy will distance its desire to fight against us by several years. And if we devote the right resources, because any shekel invested in security today is paid back in many other shekels through the strength of this country and the Israeli economy, which, thank God, is very strong. And this will create such a military that can push off wars in the next decade as well. Some people will say amen to that, and some people will even act in order to realize this amen. Thank you very much, Major General Aaron Khalil.